Bangladesh, a nation at the crossroads of South and Southeast Asia, is undergoing a profound transformation in its trade and import policies. Historically reliant on a handful of neighboring countries, particularly India, for its industrial and consumer goods, Bangladesh is now charting a bold new course, one defined by diversification, resilience, and strategic foresight. This evolving approach is not merely a reaction to shifting geopolitics. It reflects Bangladesh's ambition to safeguard its economic future, strengthen its key industries, and prepare for its impending transition from least developed country, LDC status, to a middle-income nation. At the heart of this transformation lies a simple but powerful realization. Overdependence on any single trade partner is a vulnerability, especially in a world marked by political uncertainties, supply chain shocks, and evolving global trade norms. By systematically expanding and deepening its import relationships, Bangladesh seeks to minimize risk, enhance its industrial capabilities, and create new opportunities for growth and innovation. One of the most significant pivots has been toward the United States. In 2025, as Bangladesh faced the threat of a steep 37% U.S. tariff on its critical garment exports, interim leader Mohammed Yunus took decisive action. Rather than merely appealing for leniency, Bangladesh offered a compelling value proposition. It would dramatically increase imports of U.S. commodities: cotton, wheat, corn, soybeans, liquefied natural gas, LNG, and even high-tech semiconductors. This initiative was not just about averting tariffs. It aimed to address the persistent $6 billion trade deficit with the U.S. and to modernize Bangladesh's all-important garment sector, which relies heavily on high-quality raw materials. A non-binding agreement to import U.S. LNG underscored the seriousness of Bangladesh's intent and its recognition of the need for diversified energy inputs to power its growing industries. Meanwhile, Bangladesh has taken significant steps to strengthen its trade ties with Pakistan, a move that signals both strategic pragmatism and regional reconciliation. In late 2024, direct shipping routes between Karachi and Chattogram were restored after a long hiatus, drastically reducing transit times and costs. The impact was immediate. By the first quarter of fiscal year 24 to 25, imports from Pakistan had surged by approximately 27%, reaching $179 million. These imports included essential raw materials for garments, Bangladesh's economic lifeblood, as well as chemicals, plastics, minerals, and foodstuffs. The two countries also inked agreements for the supply of staple goods such as rice, further deepening their commercial interdependence. This renewal of bilateral trade not only diversifies Bangladesh's sourcing options, but also builds critical supply chain redundancies, making the nation less susceptible to disruptions elsewhere. China, of course, remains a central player in Bangladesh's import strategy. For years, China has been Bangladesh's top supplier of synthetic and blended fabrics, providing the backbone for the country's vast ready-made garment (RMG) industry. Annual imports from China in this sector alone have reached an estimated $10 billion. But the partnership is evolving. Bangladesh is now seeking to expand cooperation with China into frontier areas such as clean energy, green technology, financial technology, and vocational training. There is also an ongoing push to enable yuan-based settlements through a Chinese bank operating in Bangladesh, an effort to streamline transactions, mitigate currency risk, and solidify the strategic relationship. The engagement of German and European chambers of commerce in these dialogues highlights the international interest in Bangladesh's emerging role as a regional manufacturing and trade hub. Europe itself is another cornerstone of Bangladesh's diversification strategy, particularly in the context of sustainable industrial inputs. The steel industry in Bangladesh, for example, is heavily dependent on imported ferrous scrap, about 90% of total feedstock. In 2024, imports of ferrous scrap from the European Union reached over 5.19 million metric tons, marking a 10.8% year-on-year increase. To ensure compliance with EU environmental standards and regulations, Bangladeshi steel mills are actively seeking approvals under the EU Waste Shipment Regulation. This collaboration not only supports Bangladesh's steel manufacturing ambitions, but also aligns with global trends toward sustainability and circular economies. Bangladesh's outreach extends even further into the heart of Central Asia. In May 2025, the Bangladesh-Uzbekistan Business Summit marked a milestone in Dhaka's efforts to cultivate new trade corridors. The two countries discussed collaboration across a broad spectrum of sectors: textiles, where Uzbekistan's cotton expertise is of clear value; pharmaceuticals, leveraging Bangladesh's growing generic drug manufacturing; agriculture and information technology. These dialogues signal Bangladesh's intent to embed itself into the wider Commonwealth of Independent States (CIS) network, tapping into new resource pools and export markets. In Southeast Asia, Bangladesh is exploring deeper engagement with ASEAN countries like Indonesia and Malaysia. Traditionally, the bulk of Bangladesh's imports from this region have been intermediate goods, chemicals, machinery, and components essential for export-oriented manufacturing. In 2024, over half of Bangladesh's total imports came from China, India, Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia. However, the export value returned from these relationships has remained relatively low, prompting calls from economists and industry leaders for a recalibration. By sourcing more value-added and intermediate goods from ASEAN, Bangladesh can enhance its export competitiveness and improve its trade balance, especially as it eyes new markets for its garments, pharmaceuticals, and agricultural products. Turkey, too, is emerging as a potential game-changer in Bangladesh's import portfolio. Turkish officials have openly stated their ambition to replace India as a major supplier to Bangladesh, particularly in sectors such as machinery, defense equipment, healthcare products, and agricultural technology. This overture reflects Turkey's broader strategy to expand its economic footprint in South Asia and the Islamic world, and it dovetails with Bangladesh's desire to reduce overdependence on any single partner. For Bangladesh, Turkish imports offer not only alternative sources of advanced industrial inputs, but also a hedge against regional uncertainties. Why does this shift matter so much for Bangladesh? The answer lies in the interplay between geopolitics, economic security, and long-term national development. With growing tensions between Bangladesh and neighboring India, driven by disputes over water resources, border management, and regional influence, Dhaka is acutely aware of the risks inherent in single-source dependency. By diversifying its import base, Bangladesh insulates itself from unilateral disruptions, whether due to political disputes, logistical bottlenecks, or external shocks such as the COVID-19 pandemic. Economic resilience is the next driving force. Bangladesh's industrial economy, and especially its garment sector, depends on the timely and reliable availability of raw materials. By cultivating multiple supply chains across continents, from U.S. cotton and LNG to EU ferrous scrap, Chinese fabrics, Pakistani chemicals, and ASEAN intermediates, Bangladesh creates a buffer against supply interruptions, price volatility, and trade policy swings. This strategy is also deeply intertwined with Bangladesh's ambitions for strategic growth. As the nation moves toward graduation from LDC status, it faces new challenges: reduced preferential trade access, increased competition in global markets, and the need for technological and energy upgrades. Diversifying imports of high-value industrial inputs, advanced technologies, and sustainable resources supports the country's goals of industrial modernization, export diversification, and inclusive economic development. In summary, Bangladesh's proactive efforts to diversify its import sources represent a deliberate, calculated strategy to balance its geopolitical relationships, minimize supply chain risk, and fuel industrial growth. This approach spans the globe, from boosting U.S. imports to strengthen trade relations and avert tariffs, to deepening ties with Pakistan and China for critical raw materials, to tapping into European, Central Asian, Turkish, and ASEAN markets for sustainability, innovation, and competitiveness. This multidimensional strategy signals to the world that Bangladesh is not content to be a passive player in global trade. Instead, it is leveraging its growing economic clout, diplomatic agility, and entrepreneurial spirit to secure a more stable, prosperous, and resilient future, one that will serve its people not just today, but for generations to come.